He is a communist because he's said publicly, it's on tape, that he wants to seize the means of production. That's a communist manifesto. So, he can try to hide behind the socialism. And by the way, the ballot is a complete joke as well.
Elections are being held in New York, in Virginia and New Jersey in what's being seen as a big test of public opinion a year after Donald Trump's re-election. Much of the attention is focused on the contest for mayor of New York, where the controversial left-wing Democrat Zohran Mamdani is well ahead in the polls. In the final video of a relentless campaign, Mamdani got another endorsement from Senator Bernie Sanders.
How you doing, man?
How you doing?
All right, you're doing great, huh?
I'm doing better now.
What a politician!
I didn't know he was going to show up. He finally did show up.
All right, I'm going to be saying that you're inspiring the entire world. How's that?
A little pressure.
A little pressure.
Well, Donald Trump has posted to Truth Social warning if communist candidate Zohran Mamdani wins the election for mayor of New York City. He writes, "It's highly unlikely that I will be contributing federal funds. This once great city has zero chance of success or even survival." And the president then went on to endorse the independent candidate, Andrew Cuomo, who is a former Democrat. Well, let's talk to Hal Lambert, who is a Republican megadonor, former advisor to Republican Senator Ted Cruz, and also served on the inaugural committee for President Trump. Good evening to you. It's really good to have you with us, Hal.
Thank you. Glad to be on. Good evening to you.
An important set of elections. What are you going to be looking out for tonight?
Well, I think that the New York City mayor's race is probably a done deal. I think Mamdani's won it. We'll see by how much. And, that's a big function of it's just terrible candidates on the ballot. The New Yorkers want change. They want lower housing costs. They want lower food costs. They want lower costs in general. But what they're voting for, what they don't realize that they're voting for is it's only going to get worse with the, quote, free housing and free buses and free transportation and grocery stores run by the government. They're going left, and they'll find out soon that doesn't work either. So we'll see what happens in a few years after those policies fail, if they come back to their senses. But if you look at, say,
perhaps they'll fail if the president actually carries out that threat to withhold federal funds.
Well, they'll fail because you can't give government-run grocery stores. Those don't work. That's what you do in the Soviet Union. And by the way, he is a communist because he's said publicly, it's on tape, that he wants to seize the means of production. That's a communist manifesto. So, he can try to hide behind the socialism. And by the way, the ballot is a complete joke as well. There's no voter ID required. Mamdani's on the ballot twice. Let's start with that. And then you have they left Eric Adams on there, even though he had dropped out. And then you got Cuomo kind of down in the bottom corner. So, look, they'll do everything they can to rig this to one direction. He's very likely to win. You're going to see, I think, a big flow of capital out of New York. You're seeing things like the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ Stock Exchange open up trading in the state of Texas. I think that's all a hedge against a tax that he wants to put on trades that are done in New York. So, we'll see what happens, but I think that one's already done. New Jersey, Virginia are big races. You could see a surprise in one of those two states. The Democrats are leading. They're Democrat states, so it's not a surprise. But there could be a surprise there. The top view or the top vote. People are voting on the economy in both states. So I think that bodes well. We'll see what happens there.
But you have got a Republican candidate in New York. Why aren't people backing him?
It's just so hard. You have 10-to-1 Democrat advantage in voters, and Cuomo was just not a good candidate to try to steer people in his direction. He's older. He's a former governor. A lot of people still view him as having done a terrible job during COVID. So I think that was just a bridge too far. and you end up with what you have there, which is just not not a good selection overall.
But if, as seems likely, you get the election of a pretty radical left winger in New York, and Democrats also win in Virginia and New Jersey, do you think that will be seen as quite a damning verdict on President Trump a year after he was re-elected?
I really don't. I think that his approval ratings are quite strong overall. So these are Democrat city, Democrat states. I mean, that's just where we are right now. And by the way, we haven't even talked about the California proposition, which would enable them to redistrict. I suspect that probably passes as well. So they're going to try to redistrict where they can, to try to put more Democrats in the House for next year's midterms. So, we're just talking about very, very blue states and blue cities. And so I don't think it's a referendum on Trump at all.
Well, you've now got this shutdown continuing so that the government isn't functioning. That is actually beginning to hit home, isn't it? It is disrupting flights. It is disrupting many of the public services. Do you think that perhaps President Trump is going to be somewhat punished by voters for not focusing sufficiently on the problems closer to home, albeit he's been dealing with some very important global problems?
Well, a few things on that. The shutdown, I mean, I was told literally 3 weeks ago that the Democrats' plan was to keep this shut down through the election. They don't want to upset their base. They didn't want to create a situation where their base was upset that they, quote, caved to Trump and therefore didn't show up to vote, right? That they didn't want that to happen. Schumer got in a lot of trouble in March when he voted for this exact same continuing resolution and allowed the vote to go through and kept the government open. They just didn't want to make that mistake again. And Schumer's worried about, being challenged by like a farther left person there in New York, AOC. So this was calculated by the Democrats. It'll open. I predict they will vote on this by tomorrow or Thursday in the Senate. It'll then go back to the House because they had to change the dates. They'll vote on it either Friday or Monday, and we'll be back open by early next week. So that's going to end. And it was all orchestrated around the election. As far as Trump, yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, as far as Trump, he's doing some great things, and so I don't think he's not focusing on the U.S. That's all he's focused on. Look at all the pledged foreign investments that are going to come in. Over 1.8 trillion pledged from places like Japan, UAE, Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, South Korea. He's stopped a number of wars. No one talks about it. Israel and Iran, they got into it. India and Pakistan. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's secured the border. There hasn't been an illegal come across since April.
Yeah, but I mean, despite all of that, and clearly there is still much to be done in terms of resolving the war in Gaza. And Trump does very often talk about those undoubted breakthroughs that he has achieved on the foreign stage. But I mean, Donald Trump's approval rating has fallen to one of its lowest points, just 37% of Americans expressing approval of his performance as president. Do you not think that he should take these elections, which appear to be all heading the Democrats' way, as something of a warning sign?
Well, he's not up for re-election. I don't think he views it that way. And look, we've seen different polls say different things. Here's where I think this is headed. We've got lower gas prices across the board, lower oil prices. You're going to see lower interest rates when the new Fed chair comes in. Even if this Fed doesn't cut, you're going to see lower interest rates. So costs for Americans are going to come down. That's going to be a big tailwind for him going into 2026 midterms, because you're going to see, I personally think inflation is going to drop even further. And then you look at the success of the tax cuts that he passed. I mean, that was a big deal getting those through.
But then the tariffs have actually, in many cases, added to the costs on consumers in the United States, haven't they?
No, it actually, they haven't really flowed through. Even Fed Chairman Powell said that he hasn't seen it yet. Because what's happening is, especially a lot of them on China, China's not a free market. They can come in and subsidize, which they already do in many cases. So they can just subsidize it further down and basically effectively pay the tariffs. But when you look at it, there has not been a big spike in inflation that was predicted back in April when these things went into effect. It just hasn't flowed through to the consumer.
When I'm looking at figures, though, on the slump in President Trump's personal poll rating, there's also this survey recently that says 60% of Americans believe that President Trump has gone too far in using those presidential powers. Isn't there a concern that he's somewhat riding roughshod over democratic traditions in the United States?
Well, I mean, remember, President Obama he said he had a pen and he was the president and he was going to use it. He did a ton of executive orders. And honestly, when you look at polls like that, I know it's the case. The average voter, the average person is not paying attention to these executive orders. There's some coverage of them a little bit, and they cover some of the main ones. But I pay very close attention to it, and I could probably tell you 10 executive orders. So when you throw out a poll that 60% of the people think he's using it too much, how many of those people even know how many he's done and what they've actually entailed? I would argue very few Americans know the answer to that question.
I wonder whether you would accept, though, that under President Trump's time in the White House, the divisions in U.S. society appear, if anything, to have got deeper than ever. Clearly, we've had this very hard-fought battle there in New York. Clearly, Zohran Mamdani is very much at the opposite end of the spectrum than President Trump. But I'm looking at a tweet from a sitting congressman, Republican Congressman Andy Ogles, who tweeted today, "Wake up New York," and he was showing a video of the events of 9/11, which is of a plane colliding with one of the Twin Towers, which, of course, was one of the most horrendous terrorist attack ever on American soil. Do you not think it is a mistake for serving Republican politicians to resort to those kind of devices during a hard-fought election?
Well, look, the events of 9/11, the terrorist attack of 9/11 came up in the campaign, and Mamdani didn't talk about the victims. He talked about his mom not being able to wear a hijab on the subway, and that was his, experience of 9/11 and his view of 9/11 and how, and yet, you find out later she wasn't even in New York at the time. So, I think there's been some dishonesty across the board there when it comes to that. But he's also been, look, he's an interesting candidate. He smiles, he gives great delivery. He hit on the right topics, which is, costs and housing and food. And there was just no answer from the Democrat Party there, but to throw up, Cuomo, who, everyone already knew. And so I think, one of the top
Well,
issues
I mean, he won the
York,
Democratic nomination, didn't he?
That's right. And one of the top issues, quite frankly, has been, that people want change. So, he is, you could almost argue Mamdani is the Trump version of the Democrat Party, where people want to change, and he's gone hardcore on those issues. Trump went hardcore on immigration and
given
and
the
some other
fact that
things.
many of the mainstream Democrats who I've been speaking to in the last few days are actually quite worried themselves about Mamdani's election, perhaps it'll be a good thing for the Republicans if he does win tonight.
I don't like to look at it that way because Mamdani, he can do a lot of damage. And I just, I don't want New York to have problems. I go there, I work there some, when I'm traveling. And, I don't want to have to worry about more crime because he wants to defund the police. I don't want to worry about being robbed because the person that does it knows they're not going to spend much time, if any, in jail. So, I don't agree with that, philosophy. But, you do see it where people are like, well, they're going to get what they deserve and we're going to see what happens. Well, look, we saw this in the 70s. I'm sorry, I know you got to bring it. We saw this in the 70s where New York had, a lot of problems, and it ushered in a Rudy Giuliani, right? And Rudy Giuliani became mayor and cleaned up crime, cleaned up the issues around taxes and everything else. So you could see that bounce back and see it happen. We'll see.
Hal Lambert, Republican Megadonor, who served on President Trump's inaugural committee. It's been really good to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yep, thank you.